Hello, and welcome to Rumi Luncheon on energy rivalry and cooperation in Eurasia. As Jenna mentioned, my name is Fevzi Bilgin. I'm from Rethink Institute. And today's speaker is Mr. David Koranyi. Okay, and I think despite his young age, is a very accomplished individual. David is an expert on energy politics, Hungarian-US relations, and European integration. He is Deputy Director of Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. He is a member of European Council on Foreign Relations. He served as Chief Foreign Policy and National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Hungary, another Hungarian parliamentary member at European Parliament. So today's talk is about rivalry and cooperation and peace pipelines, as David put it. So it's a beautiful title, Peace Pipelines, as like pipelines pumping peace and love. And we have been just talking in the back room. I think Rumi Forum is a good venue to start a discussion about how to turn pipelines into some sort of a peace conduit. So it's very appropriate in that respect. So we hear about rivalry, competition, pipeline politics in Eurasia very frequently, not very much about cooperation. So I will ask David first explaining us how the energy resources are increasingly shaping politics in Eurasia, and what are the new developments, what are the new stakes, what is the nature of competition and rivalry, and what is this so-called big game of energy in Eurasia. And then we'll come back to the cooperation part. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Bilgin, and thank you very much for the Rumi Forum for organizing this splendid event. Thank you especially to Rashid and Jena for all the organization they put into this event. First of all, let me start by further introducing myself in a way that I come from a country, Hungary, which was several times in the last couple of decades exposed to energy, and we kind of witnessed on our own skin how energy and politics are intertwined and interrelated, and how energy can cause a significant vulnerability in terms of the economic and political fate of a certain country, but also in terms of how the country is positioned in the region and in Europe in that particular case. I was in government when the cutoff in 2009 happened. The Russians, because of their respective dispute with Ukraine, decided to cut off the natural gas supply lines via Ukraine, so that left Hungary for more than 3 weeks during the peak of the winter in January without natural gas. And that was kind of an existential threat to the country's national security and also economic competitiveness. So I have this first-hand experience of how energy can very quickly turn into a political and also existential problem. But then I also have the positive experience, again referring back to my period in government, how then we were able to turn this existential threat into something more positive, and to build a regional cooperation and regional integration plan around it that essentially tries to break the stranglehold of Russia on the Central and Eastern European countries, try to diversify resources coming into Central and Eastern Europe, and try to put the entire energy scene of Central and Eastern Europe on a more sustainable and stable footing. That said, what I want to do now is to take a so-called helicopter view and lay out a vision in addition to go through the individual issues that of course tie into each other when it comes to Eurasia and the Middle East, energy and geopolitics. And what I will do, and I would like to say that beforehand, what I will do is to lay out sort of like the best case scenario. What should we do provided we live in an ideal world, and how should we endeavor to get closer to an ideal world, and to showcase how huge the potential is in terms of energy cooperation in the wider region around Turkey, how energy could foster stability and mutual understanding in the region, how it can enrich the region and propel growth in the region, and how it can also be used to nurture regional cooperation and integration beyond energy. So it's not just energy. But what I also will do, in order not to be so illusionary, is to introduce briefly the clear and present dangers and the disruptive or potentially disruptive forces in terms of this energy cooperation. Before we dive in, just two caveats. One is I don't possess, I would love to, but I don't possess any kind of master plan, detailed master plan in terms of how we eventually will get there. It's more like what I will advocate for today. It's more like a line of thinking. It's more like a certain logic. It's more like a wishful thinking in a way, if you like, but based on reality. And second, that's connected to the first, is that I'm the first to admit that it's not going to be easy. Sometimes what I'm going to say might sound like a fairy tale. So it's a very optimistic approach, bordering sometimes wishful thinking again. And it's something very long term. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in the next 5 years. It's not going to happen in the next 15 years. But I still think that when it comes to the whole idea, the whole strategy, we still have a fighting chance, and this fighting chance is still a bit better at least than what Don Quixote had against the windmills. So after this brief introduction, let me just start with an overview on how I see the regional energy scene as of today. One, there is a huge potential in the region when it comes to energy. The wider region around Turkey, that includes also Russia, contains about 75% of the known fossil fuel resources in the world. And that does not yet include the new discoveries in the Eastern Mediterranean and also in the Black Sea region, so that could add to that. That is a region that is also very rich in renewables, in sun especially, but also in wind, huge potential for geothermal energy, so the potential is certainly there. That's also a region that is close to a huge market, a market of the European Union and Europe in general, a market which is, whatever happens inside Europe with shale gas and all these uncertainties, but it's quite clear that Europe is increasingly will rely on energy imports, so there will be a huge demand for energy outside Europe. So that's a huge potential market for the Middle East and Turkey. And there is an increasing demand and increasing market also in the region itself, in Turkey in particular, but also in Iraq and the region around, because of economic growth. So that's the plus side. When it comes to the minus side, and it's also a pretty long list, we talk about the region which is torn by actual and potential conflicts. Syria, Iraq, Iran, Cyprus, the Middle East peace process, Israel, Palestine. There is a very low level of trust between the key players in the region, and that has diminished in the last couple of years. The tendencies here are not really good, on the contrary. The zero-sum mentality, which has always been present in this part of the world, has not improved significantly lately. And the cooperation potential is actually pretty low. The Arab awakening, which of course in general is a very, very welcome phenomenon, but then it's already quite apparent that where we are now is political turmoil, disarray, uncertainty when it comes to politics, but also when it comes to economic growth and the whole investment environment. And that is also very closely connected to the energy world, because, I mean, long-term project, just as you said in the beginning, these require a stable, predictable investment environment, economic environment, political environment, and this is just not there right at the moment. Energy in the region, although it's a very energy-rich region, as I said in the beginning, is relatively expensive. Or when it's not expensive because the state spends considerable amounts of money on subsidies, like it's in the case of Egypt, but also Turkey and other countries, which essentially is also out of the pockets of the people, but it's not yet apparent. It's not that apparent as when you pay a higher price at the pump or the electricity bill. But energy, while we talk about the region which is very energy rich, at the same time pays much more for energy than it's supposed to be because of its richness. And in addition to that, and this is something which affects the daily lives of people, we have in many countries in the region unreliable service. We have underinvestment in the energy infrastructures. We have daily blackouts still in Iraq. Well, overall, what I see, apart from the GCC countries, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and maybe perhaps Azerbaijan, energy right now, again, despite of all the riches, is more a vulnerability in the region than a strength. So all in all, if I have to sum up the regional energy picture, is that I would say that we have a range of global uncertainties. I kind of didn't talk in the beginning, but we could come back on that later, which also tie into these regional uncertainties. There is a lack of climate deal. Nuclear energy is in the doldrums after Fukushima. Nobody knows what will happen with nuclear energy projects in the region, how this then in turn will affect global demand for oil and gas, etc., etc. But then when it comes to the region, what I see is that political instability hinders these energy projects. And then energy itself very often is a source of instability. And this is something I would like to talk about more in detail in the next chapter. The strategic issues, the main energy conundrums in the region, if you like. It's not going to be exhaustive because there is a long list, but these are, I think, how I see it, these are the key strategic conundrums in the region as we speak today. One is the Caspian issue, the Caspian gas. After 15 years of talks and 15 years of debates and discussions, what I see now is that the Southern Gas Corridor, which will bring substantial amounts of gas eventually, initially not that substantial, but eventually I think substantial amounts of gas to Europe, is on the move. I'm very optimistic that by in the course of the next 12 months, we will be able to see a more or less clear picture of how the Southern Gas Corridor will look like, which projects, when it comes to the European leg, will be selected, whether it will be Nabucco West or TAP, and what will be the initial quantities coming to Europe from the Caspian, in that case from Shahtanis to from Azerbaijan. I'm more skeptic about the Turkmen gas source, but we will talk about that later. And this is a timeline which is well within reach. I'm quite optimistic that the first Caspian natural gas supplies will reach Europe by 2018. And that's the timeline we are looking at right now when it comes to the Southern Gas Corridor. And all in all, this is a very positive development. I have to warn, though, on one issue which is very often overlooked, but I think it's a clear and present danger, is the potential repercussions on a key regional conflict, which is the conflict of Nagorno-Karabakh and the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. While in itself it's a great thing that Azerbaijan will become a major exporter eventually to Europe, but when it comes to energy riches and incomes and revenues from energy and how this could affect the balance and the self-perception of Azerbaijan, and then in turn how this could affect the conflict around Nagorno-Karabakh, is something we have to keep in mind in order to avoid a situation when a more confident Azerbaijan feels that military force could be an option to solve the Nagorno-Karabakh issue. So this is something we have to be aware as a potential negative side effects of. How
much you think is that likelihood of a conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh issue, like a military clash?
I think it's in nobody's interest right now, not in the interest of the Azeris, not in the interest of the Armenians, but you could never discount the accidental factor, what happens if there is a local build-up of confrontations, and then the spillover effect is just so big that you cannot eventually control the events. Yeah. Just lately, and me being a Hungarian, this is not something which I'm very proud of, but there was this incident of the Hungarian government, transferring a prisoner previously held in prison in Hungary and sentenced for life because of a brutal murder he committed 7 or 8 years ago, I believe. He murdered his counterpart at a NATO academy in Budapest, the Hungarian capital, because he was Armenian and he had grievances from the Nagorno-Karabakh war from the early 90s. And then when he returned to Azerbaijan, originally to serve the remainder of his prison sentence, he was then pardoned and released. And that fueled tensions between the two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and at some point they were very close to an actual military confrontation. And every once in a while, and this happens like every 2 or 3 months, there are border confrontations between the Azeris and the Armenians. So you could never discount that factor. So this is something we have to be mindful of. The KRG piece, Iraq piece, again, this is huge potential. If you have had the chance to read the World Energy Outlook issued by the International Energy Agency just a week ago, one of the key factors when it comes to the global energy picture is Iraq, and the potential in Iraq to develop or redevelop their oil and gas resources in the coming decade. And the output from Iraq in itself will be able, if everything goes right, to stabilize global oil markets and to keep oil prices down for the foreseeable future, or at a level which will not hinder global economic growth. So Iraq is a key factor. And inside Iraq, I'm sure you're aware of all these thorny and conflicting issues with regard to the distribution of revenues coming from the fossil fuel riches. There is no agreement at present between Erbil, the KRG capital, and Baghdad on the distribution of revenues. There is no agreement on the Kirkuk oil fields, where they will actually belong, and this ties into the larger discussion about regional autonomy and regional governance, of course, within Iraq. And if this is not resolved, if there is no comprehensive hydrocarbon law in the near future in Iraq, then this could seriously hinder the developments within Iraq, and in turn this could seriously diminish the potential in Iraq and when it comes to oil and natural gas developments. And there is an additional component to that, which then ties into, again, regional peace and regional cooperation, is the KRG piece, and how quite surprisingly and wonderfully in the last couple of years, a so-called economic and energy rapprochement developed between Turkey and the northern part of Iraq, between the KRG and the Turkish government, out of very important mutual interest that Turkey has an increasing energy demand. They are willing to secure natural gas and also oil at preferably a lower price than they are able to do now from Russia, Iran, and other places. And they view the KRG as the potential source for that additional gas demand in Turkey. On the other hand, this is the typical example of how cooperation in the field of energy could then have spillover effects into regional cooperation, economic cooperation, and eventually political cooperation. And again, this is still in a very fragile state because it ties into the whole debate within Iraq, whether there will be an agreement. Baghdad is eyeing this whole rapprochement between the KRG and Turkey very suspiciously as we speak right now. But then at the same time, Turkish firms are already very interested in investing into the KRG or the KRI beyond energy. So it's not just about energy anymore, all the infrastructure which surrounds energy, and then all the services industry, and then all the logistical pieces coming together. So this could then have a lock-in effect if everything goes right, and then could in turn have a pacifying effect on the whole Kurdish problem and how that plays out in the coming years, and contribute to regional stability and peace. So that's a key issue. There is one element though there, and this is the next piece I wanted to talk about, is Syria, and how the Syrian civil war could play into that, and how the Syrian civil war could derail that whole fragile initial rapprochement between the KRG and Turkey. Obviously, because there is a significant Kurdish population in Syria, and because well, nobody knows exactly what is happening right now inside Syria, but it is clear that the PYD in Syria somehow is feeding or is cooperating with the PKK. PKK increasing its activity in southeastern Turkey, destabilizing the whole situation. That in turn could have, or it could deepen suspicion between the KRG and Ankara, the Turkish government. So this whole fragile rapprochement, which started between the KRG and Ankara, could easily unravel. So this is something we have to keep an eye on. Iran, I don't want to spend much time on that. It's a huge liability as we speak right now, like Syria, because the potential regional repercussions of Syria when it comes to a potential war with Iran, the potential regional repercussions are even worse. But then the potential, the positive potential there is also huge. The original idea, many people forget that nowadays, but the original idea behind the Nabucco project was to bring Iranian gas to Europe. It wasn't about Azeri gas eventually, it was about Iranian gas. So if one day, provided that there is a comprehensive solution to the Iranian nuclear crisis, again, I'm talking long term, this is not tomorrow, but hopefully this will happen one day, Iran could be an additional source for natural gas supplies to Europe. So that's also a potential we have to keep an eye on. And then finally, and this is a very delicate place as well, like all the rest, is the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm sure you all heard about the recent findings around Cyprus, around Israel, offshore findings mostly, offshore Gaza, offshore Egypt, offshore Lebanon, and potentially also offshore Turkey. We are in the initial phases of the geological part of the whole thing, so nobody knows exactly, although the Israelis are way ahead, and also the Cypriots are starting to go way ahead. But we still don't know exactly what are the actual reserves we are looking at. The current already proven reserves are already huge enough to cover 10 years worth of European gas demand, which kind of shows you how significant the quantities we are talking about when it comes to the Eastern Med. Funnily enough, and that's one of the ironies, you may have heard about this famous saying of Golda Meir, the former Israeli prime minister, who once said that she never really understood why Moses led the Jewish people for 40 years in the desert in order to reach the only spot in the Middle East which has no oil. But this is no longer true. With the new findings around Israel and offshore Israel, this is no longer true. There is very likely oil and even more so natural gas. But then again, all these political issues surrounding the Eastern Mediterranean fossil fuel resources, the Cyprus issue, the Middle Eastern peace process. So how you untangle that then ties into how you can actually capitalize on these riches. And without further ado, just that we will have time for discussion. I will try to sum up, but this will leave us all these conundrums, all these difficulties, and why despite all these difficulties, I'm still optimistic that this could, I mean, the individual pieces could be solved over time, and then they could be tied together, and then something bigger could be built on these. So while I talked about natural gas a lot, while I talked about energy imports to Europe a lot, but the name of the game and the strategic exercise here is essentially what you said in the beginning, to make these countries realize that in order to really capitalize on these riches, they need each other. And they need to build frameworks and structures and mutual trust in the first place. And then at a certain point also institutions which manage these relations, which provide a stable framework for these relations, and which provide a good framework then in the next step to to build upon the energy cooperation and develop that more. Many people usually forget, but the European Union as a project started on energy cooperation. The coal and steel community in the European Union was about the idea to come up with a joint structure which manages one of the key resources at the time, coal and steel, which could then prevent another war after the Second World War happening in Europe. And then the second big realization, and that is still today also one of the cornerstones of the European Union, is the nuclear cooperation, the Euratom Treaty. So the European Union, however unlikely it seemed at that time, barely a decade after the Second World War, started to build something similar based on energy and based on how these countries, eventually the 6 countries, could come together and try to develop a common framework how to develop their own energy resources. It hasn't started, and the Monnet and Adenauer and Schuman idea was not about the grand construct and the political union overnight, but it was precisely this idea to start to tie these smaller cooperation structures together and then build something big. And in that vein, I just would like to briefly lay out a couple of ideas I have for this cooperation. One is the Eastern Mediterranean I mentioned. I am frankly quite doubtful whether in the current environment we can solve the Cyprus Status issue overnight.
No.
It's highly unlikely as where we stand right now. But what we could do though, and this could then also in time contribute to the overall solution of this long-standing problem, is to come up with some sort of a revenue sharing mechanism. Yeah. A temporary revenue sharing mechanism which reassures the Turkish Cypriots in the northern part of the island that they will also capitalize on the energy riches of the island, and then could also contribute certain kind of fund for the reunification to safeguard some of the money which comes out from these resources for a later stage of the reunification. The second key piece of the Eastern Med, how I see, and this is also a peace project of sorts, and also a small step, but then could be essential when it comes to the larger Middle East peace process and the Israeli-Palestinian talks, is the offshore findings near Gaza. The Gaza Strip, and there is also a quite substantial find just offshore Gaza, which the Israelis were not letting develop. There is a British company called the BG Group is ready to exploit these resources. For various reasons this was not proceeding in the last couple of years, but were this go forward, I think it would be, one, a good revenue source for the Palestinian Authority and also for the Gaza Strip. And two, it could also contribute to some sort of a peace fund in the future for the peace process.
Yeah. Considering that UN is voting for the observer status for Palestine today, so
yes,
that's may have something to do with that in the future.
And frankly, and this is my personal opinion, but I have the feeling that the president, the US president, in his second term, will make a very serious attempt again to try to resolve the issue. Whether this is again similar to the Cyprus conundrum, feasible in the current Middle Eastern setting, it's not going to be easy, but at least we should try. A third piece, an idea, if you like, is some sort of a joint fund, small amounts of money coming into a pot or gathering into a pot from hydrocarbon revenues from Iraq, from the GCC countries, from Syria at a later stage, that would then constitute to some sort of an Arab stabilization and growth fund, which could then finance the political transition and also help the economic transition in these countries, similar to what we have in the European Union, the cohesion fund. So it's of course very different because the regional circumstances are very different, but in the similar vein at least, that could then signify regional solidarity, Arab solidarity, and also could be very helpful in terms of joint economic development and joint methods and joint institutions. An additional element, and this is a small thing but could be very instrumental, is to also use these hydrocarbon revenues, or part of these hydrocarbon revenues, very small part indeed, to build up think tanks, institutions, research institutions that would then promote these ideas, foster regional cooperation, develop and oversee common rules, also on the very pragmatic level, but also on the strategic level, how to think about these issues on a strategic level. And then finally, and this I find particularly as a European particularly important, is to use Europe from the perspective that we have this thing called the European Energy Community, which essentially is a model we used with Ukraine, Moldova, several countries in the Balkans. We are in negotiations to use that at a certain point with Turkey. And this could be also a good model for the Middle Eastern countries and also for North African countries, is essentially the framework the European Union uses right now for energy. It's also in development within the European Union, because the common internal market of energy in the European Union, it is just finalizing as we speak. It will be finalized by 2015 most likely. But then this energy community, the rules of the energy community, could then be expanded and could then be extended to these countries I mentioned before. So there could be this one big energy community consisting of consumer countries, mostly in the European Union, but also producer countries, and bounding this whole big area together based on a common set of rules. And also not just a common set of rules, and not just the rule of law, but also projecting in a way, I think, what is the best about the European Union, this win-win mentality, the trust building, the rule-based systems, the regional cooperation schemes, the joint institutions, the revenue sharing mechanisms, the principle of solidarity. And I say this knowing that what the external image of the European Union is right now, but I have a deep belief that we are going to overcome this current crisis, and the European Union, as many times before, will be stronger after the crisis and will be able to use the crisis to reinforce itself. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the outcome of the Eurozone crisis. Very briefly, I don't want to go into the details, but I already talked about the role the European Union could play there. I also see a very significant US role in all these, because most of the issues I outlined, be it the Eastern Med, be it the KRG, be it Syria, be it the others, the US has an important role to play. I see a danger there as well, because with the increasing self-sufficiency of the United States, with the shale gas and shale oil revolution in Northern America, I'm somewhat concerned that the US will be more detached from these problems in the Middle East. That should not happen. They should be even more engaged. They should not be satisfied with just containing these problems that exist today, but should be more proactive in trying to solve them, trying to overcome them. So that's a key piece. There is a thing called the US-EU Energy Council, which already exists and which tries to coordinate diplomacy, energy diplomacy, among others, between the US and the EU. We should use that more when it comes to these problems. And on, we can come back on these issues with the discussion. The bottom line, and let me just stop here, is that, again, what I emphasize in the meantime, it seems quite distant now, and it seems like a fairy tale, a dream right now, that this could then, even the individual pieces to be resolved seem quite distant, because they seem so intractable right now. But then, while trying to solve the individual pieces, while trying to make progress on these issues, we should also not lose sight of the big picture and this strategic thing. And let me finish with that. I would really love to live the day when the Middle Eastern Union gets its Nobel Peace Prize for what it achieved in the last 50 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, these are very interesting ideas, especially, you know, the later part of your presentation. And I think in terms of the long trajectory of the energy politics in the region, and the huge investment that it requires. These all oblige these countries to cooperate for their own rational interest. And that may be a good reason to create some sort of a cooperative scheme. Yes, it's like a democratic peace theory that, you know, like you don't fight each other anymore when you benefit. And in that sense, natural gas is dramatically different than oil, for oil there's a world market and you can buy. These are some technical info about oil that you can buy spot from anywhere you want or so. But when it comes to natural gas, it requires so much investment to extract and to transport. And if you need to transport through mostly pipelines these days, if you want to liquefy it, like if you make it LNG, that requires enormous investments, like building an LNG terminal, such as in Cyprus. Yes, after they extract all this natural gas, that's like $7-8 billion, and it seems like there's no place to build it. Like it's not a big enough island, and same goes for Israel. Like they have such issues. And building a pipeline about 1,000 miles or so, again, like $7-8 billion. So huge investment. And every natural gas contracts are usually about for 25 years or so. That's a quarter century you're committing to buy gas from that country no matter what. And usually with a fixed price, which over time gets very, very expensive. Okay, so for example, Turkey is paying enormous price for Iranian gas. Is very expensive, but then when it comes to Azeri gas, it will be like 40% of what they pay for Iranian. So all in all, it requires a long-term vision, long-term investment, long-term cooperation, and that may really lead to some scheme of cooperation, reluctantly initially, yes, but then they have to get together. They have to send their resources to some places. And I think one of the best example is this Caspian Basin, Azeri gas and oil, how it's transported through Georgia, which is not a really stable place, and then comes to Turkey. Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan is the longest international pipeline in the world, which pipes oil. And all these things were seen totally impossible 10 years ago, and now we have a BTC pipeline running and working, and now the next step is TANAP natural gas pipeline, which will pump gas to Europe, and that's like 7-8 years from now. So we are talking about kind of near future, all right, and also a little bit like a mid-term future, about some sort of a stability in terms of which is basically defined by rational interest of the actors. So that would be interesting to see. Yes. Okay.
Just one brief,
sure.
I mean, a couple of brief comments of what you said about the LNG in Cyprus. I think it's one of the best examples what we could use, because it's, I mean, there are different estimates. What I heard is about $10 billion, which is about half the GDP of Cyprus in a year, which is a huge investment. Of course, in themselves, they're not going to be able to do that. And it's not very efficient. While when it comes to a pipeline from Cyprus to Turkey, which is a huge market, which is going to increase even more so. There will be the TANAP pipeline crossing Turkey and then feeding into either Nabucco or TAP, or my take is that eventually I think both, because there will be enough demand to feed and supply to feed into both. It would make much more sense to build that pipeline for about 1/10 the cost that LNG terminal on Cyprus will cost to Turkey, and that could again also tie into the trust between the countries, the whole Cyprus issue, and that could bound the countries together. The other project like this, which is similar to what you said about the BTC pipeline, and it's very true. I mean, people said that it's a dream, it's never going to happen, and now the BTC is indeed functioning for the last 6-7 years already. There is a pipeline project called the TAP pipeline, which is
that's very ambitious.
The Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, which is, I mean, even the countries themselves show to you how ambitious the whole project is. And again, everybody says today that it's impossible, it's not going to happen, all the security issues, the pipeline will be blown up every second day, it's too long, it doesn't worth it. Yet talks slowly but surely proceed. I have my own doubts whether this will happen again next year, but it could happen, and the economic interest is certainly there. So yeah, I think we have good examples from the past, and I think we have ongoing projects which could then show the way forward.
All right. Okay, let's have questions. Let's open the floor. I think we have 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, I think I can I can follow up maybe with some more questions that I had. So you in your writing about this transatlantic energy futures, that's it's a totally different scenario there, which you're basically you know, pushing forward the concept of transatlantic energy alliance. So there, that seems to be something that is honing towards limiting the Russian impact. Yes, it's somewhat limiting Russian impact, or limiting the dependency of European market to Russia, which is a big problem. And also, on the other side, you have the insatiability of China. China needs so much energy that they just like, they don't care. They enter every market possible. They basically suck up all energy from Central Asia at the moment, especially Turkmenistan. And then we have the Middle East, which is the Middle East. Yes. So when you put all these things together, there is a possibility for cooperation, as you say. I mean, imagine that now Europe is so much linked to Russian gas and oil export, you know, to physically speaking, with the pipelines and everything. Although they may not get along on everything, but they need the gas, and they should get along. Yes, somehow they should do something about it. And but at the same time, the notion itself, like transatlantic alliance or so, which puts this alliance, you know, above all other interests, and somehow expanding, including Turkey, including Azerbaijan, possibly including Turkmenistan all the way, yes, and somehow building up an energy alliance alternative to these other giants. So, I mean, let me hear what you think about that first, and then.
No, I actually fully agree. So that's, I mean, in my understanding, the notion transatlantic extends to Turkey, obviously, but also, let me first talk about the Russia and the China piece, and then tie it back to this issue, because then it will make more sense. When it comes to Russia, two things. One is that I completely see the place of Russia in that energy community concept I just outlined before. I think the problem with Russia is that it's not the problem that we import natural gas from Russia, and it's certainly not the problem for most of the Western European states. It's the problem in those cases where Russia is in a monopoly position, and it's, as a monopoly, like every other monopoly, it's not about Russia per se, but it's like every other monopoly, it exploits this monopoly position and extracts a rent at much higher prices than it would otherwise be capable of. So I think the name of the game there is to ensure that the monopoly position of Russia doesn't exist anymore, that there is an internal energy market that is able to, in certain cases, speak in one voice when it comes to negotiations with Russia, and then it's sufficiently diversified when it comes to the energy supplies, that Russia is not in a monopolist position even in the Eastern European countries anymore, and thus not able to use to extract higher prices, but also sometimes to blackmail countries like Moldova or other countries, as it has done in the past. So that's a key component. Once this is done, and frankly I think that this is also, although it seems that it's not beneficial for Russia, but I think for the long term it's beneficial for Russia as well, because it could then finally trigger a diversification of the Russian economy as well. which is now overly dependent on revenues from the energy sector. If the revenues from the energy sector would not be that high or that big as today, then Russians will inevitably be forced to open up the economy, be more diversified. In a sense, the WTO accession already has that kind of effect, so they are moving towards that direction, and there is an increasingly widespread understanding in certain circles close to the Russian government and inside the Russian government that this has to be done at a certain point. And they already understand that Gazprom is on the retreat. They are not in a good position. But then, down the road, long term, I see a place for Russia within that transatlantic alliance, actually, and also Turkey, obviously, and also Turkmenistan and Azerbaijan. When it comes to China, I think you're right. And the danger there is that they operate on a very different set of principles than we do. And in a way that actually has to feed into the sense of urgency when it comes to these peace projects and peace pipelines in the Middle East, because there is this insatiable appetite of China for further energy resources. So the sooner we are able to lock in the Middle Eastern markets and be able to, I mean, it doesn't mean that they will not sell energy to China. That's a good thing to do. But then to avoid a situation when China is in a position to divide and conquer and to play these suppliers against each other, just as now they do in Central Asia, for example, or in Africa very often they play these countries against each other. If this energy community model will be extended to the Middle East and these countries will eventually come together, then China will not be in such a position to be able to divide and conquer and to not just energy but beyond energy be able to exert an influence which is not always very beneficial and benevolent.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Well, there seems to be a lot of natural gas reserves, but is there demand there? Because for automobiles, the demand for energy, cars don't run on natural gas yet. They could, but there aren't too much vehicles running on natural gas. And the other use of energy is, of course, for power plants, for electricity. And although most of the plants in the world run on coal. So two questions is, will the demand be there for all this natural gas? And how does natural gas in power plants compare in price to using coal?
Great questions. That's one of the big uncertainties, actually, when it comes to demand in Europe. How the prices are right now is that, just to give you a rough comparison, at least it's also on the rise. I mean, Iraq is going to produce most of its electricity from natural gas. Turkey is also increasingly reliant on natural gas, so natural gas is really coming up. I mean, it really emits 50% less when it's burned than coal. So short-term, natural gas is the single best solution for climate change. In the medium and long term, we have to think about then how to manage the transformation from the natural gas or the cohabitation with natural gas and the renewables. But short term, I think natural gas is the solution. Also, when it comes to China, China is hugely reliable. There will be a rebalancing of the prices because the current very low prices could not remain. It's just not. I mean, companies are losing out on the current price, so it's going to increase a bit, so the gap will be closed. You mentioned that there is a global oil price, but there is no global gas price. Different. The share of transportation costs within the cost of natural gas is larger than oil, so that's why, or that's part of the reason a global natural gas price as such is never going to emerge, but the convergence will be there, that's for sure. And as far as the glut is concerned, that's again a big question. In terms of reserves, China has about 1.5 times the quantity the United States has in shale gas and tight gas reserves. They have huge reserves in shale gas.
They can't get to it. They need too much water. the area
The problem is that they have essentially shale gas in the Sichuan province, where there is too much water because they're very concerned about not to poison the water table. It's essentially the water table for the entire China and the water resources for the southeast part of China. So it's a very crucial issue, and they are very concerned and cautious about that. And the other province is up in the northwest, which is called the Tarim province, which is completely arid. So that's, again, from the other side, it's a big question whether there will be enough water to use to extract that. By the way, and this is something, there are so many uncertainties when we talk about energy. This is something which is in the making also, called the dry or foam hydraulic fracturing, which is a technology in an experimental phase right now, but it could happen that in 5 years' time or in a couple of years' time from now, water will no longer be such a crucial issue when it comes to hydraulic fracturing or shale gas. So again, it's in a trial phase, and there are certain companies who are working there with foam, but the water usage is just insignificant with this new technology. So again, it could happen or it could not, but if that happens, that's going to be a huge game changer again.
Okay, we'll take the last question. Yeah.
I do apologize if you've been over this before, son.
Yes.
But regarding the gas pipeline between actually the LNG terminal in Poland and LNG terminal in Croatia that's also being discussed, and connecting potentially Europe north and south by Baumgarten to Vienna, how would that influence the whole picture, and would that remain competitive if the price would come down 4 or 5 times, as you said, it would come to the US level?
These two LNG projects are crucial when it comes to Central and Eastern Europe, and that ties back to the discussion we had about Russia and how Russia could play a long-term reliable supplier role, but then the main task is to break the monopoly of Russia. And actually these two LNG terminals are coupled together with the Nabucco West, which is going to provide natural gas from the Caspian. These, what we used to call the supply security triangle, the two LNG terminals up in north and the south, and then the third part of the triangle is Nabucco West, bringing Caspian gas to Baumgarten and to Central and Eastern Europe. So I think it's a crucial element. Again, it comes back to demand. So if the demand will uptick again, what I predicted and what I expect, then all these three projects, all the LNG terminals, the Polish LNG terminal, the Croatian LNG terminal, and Nabucco West has a place, and these quantities of gas will be sucked up easily. There is that also ties into what will happen in Poland with shale gas. What I predict is that there will be enough quantities of shale gas coming online in the next 10-15 years in Poland to be able to replace coal electricity generation, which is essentially like 90-95% right now of the electricity is generated from coal. In Poland, this is not sustainable. This is not in line with the European Union goals. So the Polish domestic shale gas production will replace that first. But then there is a potential incremental demand increase in the Balkans in the range of 10 to 12 BCM. So that could also, and maybe even more, the Balkan is hardly on gas right now, and the gas prices there are very, very, very high. So, and also in Central and Eastern Europe, in Hungary and other places, there is room for more. So I think that could happen. Just one last thought on Poland. Just a week ago, 2 weeks ago, there was the renegotiation of one of the long-term supply contracts with Russia. And already you can see there is this Polish LNG terminal up in the north is going to be ready only in 2014, the Świnoujście terminal. It's not yet even ready, yet the Russians felt compelled to give a big price increase in the range of like 20%. So the gas prices immediately came down by 20%, just because the leverage is already there when you sat down to negotiate with the Russians. So it's already happening.
All right, well, we have to close now. Thank you very much, David, for this very interesting discussion, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
All right.